Elizabeth Warren did a town hall with CNN where she really put on display why progressives don't trust her. Now, this isn't the first time she's been pressed on Medicare for All since she announced her campaign. I can remember her on at least 2 or 3 different occasions being asked about Medicare for All or healthcare, and every time she provided a very similar answer. So this isn't just one bad answer or that she got mixed up in the moment and couldn't get out a better, more clear and concise answer. This is clearly the answer that her and her staff sat down and agreed to. So if it seems like at times in the segment I'm hard on her, it's because it's rightly deserved. She's giving a shitty answer to one of the most important issues in the country right now, and she's done it repeatedly, so clearly she sees nothing wrong with it or else she would have corrected it by now. The way the question was asked is weird, but basically what he was asking is how Medicare for All is better than strengthening the Affordable Care Act. Right off the bat, I disagree with how she tries to frame her answer. She said, quote, "Right now, Democrats are trying to figure out how to provide health care to everybody at the lowest possible cost." Then she went on to bash the Republicans for trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. She's right on the second half, but the first part of her statement just isn't true. The elected Democratic Party, which is led by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, isn't trying to provide health care to everyone at the lowest cost. If they were doing that, they would be advocating for Medicare for All relentlessly, full stop. It's been proven countless times, but more recently by a study funded by the far-right libertarian Koch brothers, that single payer would actually cost less than the system we have now, and it would cover everyone. Yet Pelosi and Schumer have been fighting to block single payer for their entire careers at the behest of their donors who profit off of the system. It may seem like I'm nuanced trolling, but like I mentioned earlier, she's framed the conversation like this every time she talks about healthcare, and it's a misleading framing that is either based in ignorance or dishonesty. But regardless, it's just not true. A more accurate way to portray the dynamics of the healthcare debate in the United States is the establishment of both parties and the donor class are unified in blocking Medicare for All at all costs, even though it's what the American people want and it would effectively put an end to the healthcare crisis in the United States. So up until now, I've only critiqued the way she's framing the healthcare debate in the United States as Democrats good, Republicans bad. But her answer gets even worse. She goes on to say the first thing that we need to do is defend the Affordable Care Act. It's all about context and framing. To anyone who doesn't follow politics too closely, when you hear that, that might sound like a benign statement. Logically, having the Affordable Care Act in place is better than not having it in place. So for someone to say that they're going to defend it shouldn't be a controversial statement, right? But the context and the framing matter. To address the context, people who do actually follow politics very closely know that over the last few years, one of the main dodges from corporate Democrats to avoid talking about Medicare for All has been to go over the top defending the Affordable Care Act and acting like when it comes to the issue of healthcare, defending and improving the ACA should be the only thing that Democrats are talking about right now. Clearly, that logic is bullshit. The Affordable Care Act is not the holy grail, it's not above criticism, and it's exacerbated a lot of the problems in the healthcare system. So yes, I agree that blocking Republicans from completely destroying the Affordable Care Act and kicking 30 million people off their insurance and raising premiums for everyone else is important. But we need to be having a very nuanced and broader conversation about the entire healthcare system. There are legitimate critiques to be made about the failures of the Affordable Care Act and our entire private health insurance system, and they should be part of any conversation about the issue of healthcare in the United States. And Elizabeth Warren fails to do that every single time she talks about the issue of healthcare. Which brings me to the framing. Like I stated earlier, the problem with saying we need to defend the Affordable Care Act is the context and the framing. The question was, how is Medicare for All better than making improvements to the Affordable Care Act? Instead of answering that question directly, she decided to frame it, honestly, in the same way that any establishment corporate Democrat would. She could have just come out and said, hey, look, these are the problems we have in the healthcare system right now. 30 million people don't have health insurance in the U.S. because they can't afford it. 40,000 people die unnecessarily every single year because they can't afford basic health care. Premiums and deductibles are sky high and continue to rise. We pay more for prescription drugs than any other country in the world. We also pay more for health care overall than any other modern country in the world, and we have the worst outcomes. Medicare for All solves all those problems, covers everyone. Medicare for All solves all those problems, covers everyone in the country, and for less than the private health insurance system we have in place right now. She could have done that, but instead she lied about the position of the Democratic Party on the issue of healthcare. Then she moved on to saying that defending the ACA should be our top priority, followed by a list of improvements she thinks needs to be made to the ACA to make it better. That's why I say framing matters. To me, that doesn't sound like a fierce advocate of single-payer Medicare for all. Now, when she actually gets to talking about Medicare for all, it gets even worse. She again repeats the lie that we are all here trying to cover everybody at the lowest cost. But now this time she begins to rattle off a list of Medicare for all half measures from corporate Democrats as some kind of example that there are a lot of people working on different plans to get us to the same goal. Lowering the eligibility rate for Medicare to 60 or 55, or have the option for Americans to buy into the program at those ages. Or the reverse, having everyone under the age of 30 covered by Medicare. She brought up Medicaid expansion. This one really threw me. She mentioned employers buying into a Medicare program, which sounds a lot like the private health insurance system we have right now. One of the main problems we have with the healthcare system in the United States is it seems like the only way you can afford healthcare in the United States is if you have a good job with benefits. So a plan like that doesn't solve that problem. Then she mentioned possibly allowing employees to buy into Medicare. And again, she portrays these proposals as if they're just steps toward Medicare for all. Even if those were baby steps for Medicare for all, I believe we are way past the point of half measures because of the gravity of the healthcare crisis in the United States. The answer is Medicare for all now, full stop. But the reality is, these proposals aren't even intended to be half measures to get to Medicare for all. What they are is an attempt to take the massive Medicare for all movement, largely started by Bernie Sanders, out at its knees. They want to placate progressives in the grassroots by pretending that we all want the same thing and we're on the same side in order to ease some of the immense pressure that's being put on them by activists and voters across the country. The only way to do that is to at least pretend like you want to give us a little bit of what we want. But Elizabeth Warren, because she's either naive or a liar, is trying to sell these plans to us as if they're something that they're not. Elizabeth Warren's answers on Medicare for all throughout the primary season have been inadequate and frankly should be seen as a red flag to all progressives. This is Liz we're talking about here. She's the same politician who has kowtowed to the establishment of the Democratic Party in recent years. Same politician who refused to endorse Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary, even though he was clearly the most progressive candidate and had the right policy agenda. The same politician who has largely been silent in the last few years and hasn't really been out front on any progressive policy priorities. She's openly saying that she will take corporate money in the general election. If she's giving these weak sauce, non-committal answers on Medicare for all at this late date, it isn't a good sign, especially for her. Can you imagine how much worse she'll get on this issue if she starts taking big pharma money or money from the private health insurance industry? Liz, I hate to break it to you, you are bleeding support from the progressive base by the minute. We do not trust you, and when you're not forceful and aggressive on the issue of Medicare for all, you're not helping your case.